good. There you
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now? So sorry for that. Sorry, we just had a little technical glitch. I think it's behind us. So let me start over with my welcome to all of you to Attitude Magazine's first Back to School Expert Webinar Series of the year. We're starting this year with one of our favorite and experts, Chris Dendy, former teacher, author of many helpful books, and ADHD expert, who will be giving us a plan for how to start a new school year with all new challenges and all new teachers to give really you and your child the best possible chance for academic, behavior, and organizational success as you head into the new year. Chris will be talking about such things as how to create a plan that meets your child's specific needs, how to understand how ADHD manifests itself in the classroom and find ways to address it, how to help your teacher and your child understand what ADHD means in the classroom. And here's a really helpful one, how to identify and plan for key intervention points, the late spring, before school, after school, and how that can improve your child's chances of success. And then finally, something that everyone I think needs to plan for is how to write a brief positive letter about your child to help a new teacher appreciate your child's specific abilities and personality. Let me introduce Chris in case you have not had the pleasure of listening to her speak before. She is a former educator, school psychologist, counselor, and administrator with over 40 years of experience. She has an extraordinarily popular book written in collaboration with her son, Alex Ziegler, Teenagers with ADD, ADHD, and Executive Function Deficits. It's just now in its third edition, available on Amazon or on her website, chrisdendy.com. It's really a classic in the field of teenagers with ADHD. She has an upcoming book on launching ADHD youth expected to be published in 2019, and she's just an all-around terrific resource. So, Chris, we really appreciate your time again this year, as always. Thank you. I also want to thank our sponsor. Our sponsors are really critical. They allow us to present our webinars at no cost. We're really grateful for their help. And we have a new sponsor this year called Esteem Thrive, Esteem Therapeutics. It is a new company that has created a way to automate the complex process of managing your child's ADHD condition. You don't have to be your own ADHD expert. Esteem Thrive is a system that guides you with step-by-step insights, resources, and instructions. You may try it at no cost. Go to chooseesteem.com, CHOOSE. You can see this on the screen, esteem.com. So thank you, Esteem Therapeutics. We're going to do a quick poll now to get a sense of your interests as you go into this webinar. And while you are taking this poll, I'm just going to remind you of a few things about our new webinar platform. The widgets on your screen are resizable. You can make the slides the size that works best for you. You'll be able to ask your questions through the Q&A module that you'll see there. You can download the slides now in the resources module of the slideshow, of the screen. So some people like to download them now and take notes while they're listening. And finally, don't forget to close out any open programs to maximize your bandwidth. This is an all internet-based platform, and you need to be sure that you can hear well. That'll be the key to that. So taking the slides, what's your biggest back-to-school concern? Is it the relationship with your child's teacher? Is it putting a 504 plan? Is it establishing routines and getting school supplies together? Looks like establishing routines is a big one. So Chris will keep that in mind, and we'll address that in the questions if we don't get through it in the slides. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Chris, with our thanks again for being here today.
Well, Susan, thank you. I'm always delighted to be with you on your webinars, and it's an honor that you all invite me, and I do appreciate being here. I want to just give a brief kind of background comment here. Today I will be speaking from two perspectives. One is a professional. I've been a teacher, school psychologist, mental health counselor, and at one point in time I thought of myself as something of a, quote, expert. And then I had a son with ADHD, and clearly I was no longer an expert, because those of you who parent these children or who work with them know how difficult the ADHD can be, particularly when executive function deficits are present. And I want to clearly, having a game plan for back to school is critical, but that's not enough. You've got to do these other things too. You've got to learn all you can about ADHD, and you need to know about the brain science. There's been some marvelous brain research in recent years. And, for example, one of the key things we learned, and explains a lot, is our children have a 3-year delay in brain maturation, which means that when they're moving off to middle school, we're expecting them to do what a typical 12-year-old can do. And developmentally, our children are delayed more like an 8 or 9-year-old. So one of the things, the lessons you will learn, is that parents and teachers are going to have to provide more support longer to our children because they are not as mature. You also need to understand that perhaps 50% of our children have learning disabilities. So often those remain unidentified, and clearly we know when a child has ADHD most of the time. But if they're still struggling, you need to be looking, both educators and parents, to see if they're learning disabilities. And another major thing you need to understand are executive functions. And if you don't understand that or want to know more about it, you need to visit my website, as she said, chrisdendy.com, and I have an article on there about executive function. But I found for my son that the executive function deficits were a greater handicap and caused more problems and interfered with his academic success than even the ADHD characteristics. So here's my takeaway message to parents and educators. Our children are often late bloomers. To parents, don't feel guilty about staying involved longer, but it's a tricky thing. You have to provide them supports to get them started and watch for the time when they will be able to function with less support. And to educators, support the parents and don't criticize or judge them. Sometimes we inadvertently, out of frustration, use judgmental words that are negative and not instructive. And educators, please double-check for learning disabilities and for executive function deficits. So getting to this first slide, your plan will be different for each child and for other children. And the main question I have is, when I go in to consult, is, are children successful? Are they completing their work? Are they turning it in? Are they able to memorize? Remember to turn in their homework. And you want them to be happy. If a child is not happy at school and not succeeding, something is wrong. Now, I've worked in mental health and as a teacher, school psychologist, and here's my kind of a take-home line for you. Succeeding in school is the most therapeutic thing that can happen to a child. And some people are surprised to think of school as being therapeutic, but just think about it. If a child is doing well in class, he is going to be happy. And the truth of the matter is, there's actually research that shows being successful in school is probably equally as effective, if not more effective, than 1 hour of counseling a week in an office somewhere. So next slide, and I'm going to ask you all to advance it for us. ADHD education, and everybody in your child's sphere of influence or in his life needs to be educated. That means you, your child, and we have resources for that. There are many books. I have a book, the Bird's Eye View book. I have a video that 30 teens are featured in, and there are clips of that on my website. Now, here's the tricky part on B. you've got to read your teacher. If she knows a lot about ADHD, then just keep your mouth shut. Don't try to tell her more. But if you sense that she doesn't know a lot, then very tactfully educate her with maybe you'll do it with the initial letter that you write them, or maybe you'll give her a one-page fact sheet like my 10 key facts, because you want the teacher to be your partner and you don't want to offend them by making them think you think they don't know what they're doing. So, and if they do seem more interested, then share more information. And again, you can see where the resources are from Attitude or from my own website. I also have a very active Facebook page where I post weekly an article on some topic. Just a week or two ago, I posted a 6-part series on the risk of suicide for our children, and I've posted it on common learning problems. So visit my page. It's just it's kind of long, so I won't try to repeat it here. But if you go to Chris Dendy, my personal page, there will often be links there to the professional page. It will be at Chris Dendy ADHD, and that'll get you to the second professional page where the longer articles are posted. Now, let's go back to late spring, the year before your child enters the next grade. My son in first grade, I'm a former teacher, and I went to pick him up, and I was dying to see his new report card. And all of you out there who are teachers know what I mean. I practically snatched it out of his hand, trying to be calm, and he looked over at me, and with big crocodile tears rolling down his cheeks, he says, "Mom, please don't look at my report card. My teacher thinks I'm bad." And both of us sat there and cried, because with my background, I knew that this foretold 12 years of academic agony. And there was nothing in the report card that is bad. He was all on target, but he was a slow processor. He was quiet. He was not a behavior problem, but he was slow in learning some of the things that she wanted him to do. So you just need to be prepared to be there for your kid, for your child. And, for example, after that, what I would do is I would go to the guidance counselor in the spring before they made class assignments, and I would say, would you please, Alex is really struggling, would you please place him with a teacher who is positive and understands ADHD and is patient and would be a good match for my son? And sometimes I will add, like Mrs. Smith, but typically it's not a good idea to say, I want Mrs. Smith, because, the teachers don't want to have you telling them which teachers to assign to your child. You also need at that time to check out your IEP and 504 plan and see if you can spot anything in there that needs to be changed, because at some point at the beginning of the new year, you may have to develop or have a meeting and change it. Now, some of you may not have either of these legal protections for your child, and you may want to think about getting one if your child is struggling, and I'll tell you more about that. Next slide. Before school begins, I typically tried to meet with a teacher, and if appropriate, I took Alex along with me. And particularly in the lower grades, you're trying to really build a good relationship with the teacher. So buy them supplies, whether they're pencils or crayons. And if your child is always losing pencils, it'd be a darn good idea to take them pencils. I also would prepare a letter for the teacher and write. Sometimes parents will put a picture in there of their child, and depends on the size of the school. And I would tell you his strengths and what he likes to do. And then I would tell you his challenges. And then what I urge you to do is also list either the strategies or the accommodations that were most helpful. But you may not be aware of this, but that teacher may never see your child's IEP or 504 plan for a month or two into the school year. So your child is going to be floundering if this teacher doesn't have some guidance early on in the process. Now, the other thing that I do is I try to meet with a guidance counselor and address a couple of issues. You might share this same letter with the guidance counselor. And I would also talk to her. You know, typically our children are most successful academically of a morning. So you want any heavy academics in your middle and high school especially to be scheduled before lunch, because sometimes after lunch the medicine will start to fade. So that's one of the things you want to consider. Another thing, if your child has a former teacher, you might talk to them on the side and say, would it be possible for you to kind of informally speak to my son's teacher in the break room or whatever and give her some hints about what will work well for my son or my daughter? And if it's not going to cause people to be defensive, actually invite the former teacher to join you in a team staffing. For example, if they're getting ready to do a reassessment or an IEP or a Section 504 planning session. The other thing that's really important is to set up a regular communication system and a crisis plan if needed. I was so proud of myself. I knew that Alex sometimes would blow up. He was frustrated. I mean, he's not the kind of child who got angry, but he was terribly frustrated. We didn't know about executive function deficits. We didn't know he had learning disabilities. We didn't have good medicine. So let me warn you, if your child breaks up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you better be ready and have a crisis plan because of their emotionality. So the girlfriend breaks up with him, and he runs into the new boyfriend and the girlfriend in the hall. Now, my crisis plan was, son, if you sense that you're getting upset, go to the guidance counselor. You're trying to help him understand his feelings. Well, he went to the guidance counselor, and she was not in the building. So I've been thinking about proposing a state law that guidance counselors may never leave their offices, even to go to the bathroom, in case my son has a crisis. So, of course, you know, I'm teasing, but we tried, and progressing from there, the boys got into a huge fight. Both of them were suspended for 2 days and had to basically go to a school court hearing. And that is the saddest, most depressing, intimidating thing. And I don't easily intimidate. You had 3 school judges. You had 3 school jurors who were testifying against you. And my husband and I sat at the end of the table. Now, I've been a school psychologist and a teacher, and I always, quote, was wearing the white hat. Well, now here I am as the bad guy. As a result of that, clearly the school did not understand our son, ADHD, or the issues he faced. We transferred him to a private school, well, mainly because he was barely passing by the edge, you know, just the hanging on by his fingernails. And a 10-day suspension would have killed him. He would have failed outright. But to be honest, the private school didn't understand ADHD any better than the public school did. But they were more patient, and we eventually, we graduated from high school. You know, it took all of us, I think, in the family to make that happen. If you're, and again, it's so important to maintain communication with a teacher. So set that up in the beginning. You know, go to school, meet her at the PTA meeting or whatever, and say, I want to work with you. Sometimes he struggles. You're already aware of his challenges. So I'd like for us to communicate regularly, and you please let me know if I can help. Now, I would suggest that you email the teacher. Don't wait for her to email you, because she may have 20, 25, or 30 students. or another software program that I really like is called Remind.com. And this will help send home assignments or tests or can give you updates. And here's how this works. It's a free app. The teacher, the child, and the parent register at the central place with Remind.com. Teacher enters homework assignments, enters due dates for long-term projects, and it goes immediately to the parent and the child. And it also would be a way to tell about missing assignments. So I think technology is going to be the saving grace for so many of our children, and I think it's a blessing. I'm so thrilled. Finally, on that slide, I always tried to find a voice of reason, somebody who was sympathetic with my son. And if you stop and think about it, there have got to be teachers in that school who have children with ADHD who fully understand what you're dealing with. And they can kind of help advocate for you behind the scenes as needed. Next slide. Here's just a few tips for getting ready at home. And I saw from your survey that this isn't a huge issue. But just make sure that he has his health checkup, your child, boy or girl, and that you have medications on hand, your ADHD meds. Consider a family calendar marking important dates. Make sure you have the school supplies ahead of time. And, of course, buy any needed clothes, a backpack. And I also urge you to stock your house like it's a mini home Office Depot, because invariably they're going to come home sometime during the semester and say, "Oh, Mom, my semester project is due tomorrow." So I kept in my closet poster board, markers, report covers, anything I thought my son would need for any surprise project he had. I'd also encourage you to discuss and jointly partner with your son to select a homework area. Is it the kitchen table? Is it his room? And also figure out you're trying to educate your child about the ADHD too. So I would say, Alex, people with ADHD have trouble getting started on their homework. So what can we work out it would be a good reminder for you? And you give him just a couple of choices, not too many, because he'll be forever deciding. So would you like for me to remind you? Would you like to set your phone as a reminder, your phone alarm to remind you? Another big picture statement is please think of your son or daughter as a partner. We must remember that they didn't ask to have ADHD or executive function deficits, and you're trying to do a dual role. Engage with him as a partner and involve him in choices. You'll be much more successful. Next slide. All right, after school starts, and maintaining a positive relationship with your teacher is one of the most important things you do. You know, I know a lot of us parents would get real anxious because we didn't have answers on how to help our children. And sometimes we would be a little irritable with a teacher. And, of course, the teacher doesn't understand how scared we are. So teachers, just be aware that sometimes when our parents get edgy, that it's because they're frightened for their child's future. And they see you as the expert. And if you don't know what to do, then it's terrifying to them. I always, second bullet point, schedule a meeting with the teacher to kind of check in and make sure everything is okay. And then again, if you know they're going to struggle, check in every couple of weeks with the teacher, send them an email, and check it out. Also, I covered all the bases because my son really struggled. I attended the open house. Please tell me, what is your homework pattern for algebra? Please tell me, do you have any long-term projects? So that I knew ahead of time that I should expect Alex to have algebra homework 4 nights a week. And I would always ask, please notify me, and you also want to get this in the IEP or 504 plan, that parents will be notified about a long-term project. Because as Barkley said, for a combination of reasons related to executive function deficits, our children, a long-term project requirement disables our kids. It's complex, and I don't have time to go into it all now, but that is very important that it be broken into segments and that you be notified in advance. Now, with regard to establishing routines for homework and bedtime, again, partner with them. Give them a couple of choices. Over half of our children have sleep disorders. They have a delayed sleep cycle, and we wonder why they're up at all hours. So you may need to talk to your doctor about that if that's a huge issue for you. And some of our children actually have obstructive breathing issues, which means they wake up more often because they're having trouble breathing. Now, the important thing about sleep is that is when our memory is consolidated. So anything you learned at school is consolidated in your memory. So you really need parents to be on top of the sleep issues to make sure he gets restful sleep. Now, with regard to homework, I usually would have Alex at the kitchen table. You may want to set up a space, kind of a desk-like space in his room with pencils and papers and the things he needs. But the other thing you need to recognize is when more difficult work is required, utilizing executive functions, they deplete that executive function capacity, and you need to let him get up, go get some water. Barkley also suggests sipping on sugary drinks, just like I'm doing now, to kind of keep the glucose levels, the sugar level in their brain higher so they can concentrate better. I also would think about guidelines for electronic use. If your child is responsible, okay, but some of our kids want to charge the phone in the bedroom, and every time a text comes in, they're waking up, and they're not getting restful sleep. So some parents will have like a central place for charging. And one of the other things is to set up a launch pad. This was Kathleen Nadeau's idea, but it's a place near the exit, near the door, that they will visually see, because our children, internally their brain is not going to remind them. You have to rely on external reminders, so that there's a table and they put their homework in their backpack the night before. Put the backpack there. If they have gym clothes, any of those kinds of things, permissions, get them all there so he won't forget them. You also need to be aware of common learning disabilities that our kids have because of the executive function deficits. Reading comprehension, they can't remember what they read. Writing essays and reports, they can't hold information in mind and get it down on paper. Math facts, oh my gosh, how many evenings did I spend memorizing math facts with Alex, and the next morning he wouldn't know them. And you can't, there are ways to help them memorize, and I write about that in my books, but you can't do rote memorization. And another issue is, again, watching for the slow processing. If they write more slowly, take more time, homework takes forever at night, you need to be talking to your teacher if you're the parent. Because if it's taking more than 30 minutes or so, then I would suggest that you record how long it took the child to do, talk to the teacher and the parent and the child consider reducing the assignments. I'm just trying to see. One other thing that I want to mention is that it's important for you to understand the two laws that provide protections to our children. One is education law, IEP, IDEA, And number 2 is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, ADA. And there have been some recent revisions to 504 that point out 2 major things. Your child is eligible for services under 504, and he does not have to be failing a class to be eligible. And there's a lot of misinformation about that out in the field. And the other thing is, if you're the parent and you're working really hard with them at night and you're structuring them and you're making sure they get started, and that's why he's passing, they can't hold that against him and prevent him from getting a 504. And one of the last things I would say is, if you think your child will need supports in college or technical school, be sure to get an IEP or 504 before their senior year, so that you will have that as a sort of documentation for them to, in case they need it in college. And if they're transitioning to a new school, I just have a couple more comments to make. I kept thinking that, okay, this is going to click. Alex is gifted intellectually. He's going to do well. But the truth of the matter is that in elementary school, the way I see it, the teachers are the child's executive function. And then they get to middle school, and they're suddenly supposed to be using their own organizational skills, their own executive function, taking the initiative, getting started. And developmentally, they aren't capable of that. So we parents often call that hitting a brick wall in middle school. So you need to be aware of that. And meeting with a guidance counselor, we've already talked about that, and discussing potential challenges of transition. For example, our kids may be lost, particularly if they're visual spatial challenges, and not know where the classes are. They may think they can go to the locker between every class, and they can't. So some of that common stuff, walking through the building with him with a map to show him where his classes are. So in summary, one of the most important things, and I mean truly, is to maintain a positive relationship with your child, because he must know that you love him and support him unconditionally. I don't make the mistake I made. I used to meet Alex at the front door every day and say, hey, in this ugly voice, did you remember to bring home your homework and the books? And after about a month of that, he started walking down the driveway and going in the garage. And finally, a bit of a slow learner. But I realized I didn't even ask him how school was, how his day had gone. And you can't let academics overshadow the love you have for your child and your relationship with your child. So I probably could go on for a bit more, but that's the end. And some of the earlier things I said of they're going to need more support longer. So be aware of that. Look for learning disabilities and be aware of the executive function issues. Thank you. And now I assume we'll move to questions. I hope I've been live on here because I don't hear anybody else at this point.
Hey, Chris, it's Susan.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think I'm not sure we were forwarding the slides correctly. Did everyone see?
You did fine. You were fine at the last. They kind of backed up a little bit, but that wasn't a problem.
Okay. All right, great. So listeners, please post your questions. Chris will take some questions now. I think there's a lot of provocative comments that you made as you flew through some great advice. Here's a set of questions. I think to your point about partnering with your child, which seems like really wonderful advice to me, there are a number of questions from listeners about how to explain ADHD to a child. How should you best partner with your child in terms of understanding what their condition is and what it means for them at school?
Well, that's a complex question. That's one of the reasons why that I wrote and developed so many of my resources. Would you get my Bird's Eye View book out of the dining room on the shelf? When I wrote the Bird's Eye View book, I put some short stories or samples at the end. That's not the right word, but appendices or things. And there, you gradually ease the child into understanding ADHD. For example, Alex talks about his ADHD and what it was like for him, and he did the comparison of when I started wearing glasses, I could see individual blades of grass, and when I started on medicine, then I could really focus and pay attention. It's like I was seeing and attending to things I didn't know about. But in the back of, in some of the related issues, I have things like, how do I know if I have ADHD? And sometimes you can sit down with your child and say, does any of this sound like you? So you talk it through that way. And I also have a section that says, what do I need to know about my brain? And it explains the brain chemistry. And a lot of us prefer to use the term late bloomers. It's going to take you a little longer to mature, but you will, and your brain is going to continue to maturing, into the 30s. You'll have to think about this to know how to, it is really hard work because I used to spend so much time, it was exhausting, finding what I thought were just the right words. And then here's the thing about what do I need to know about medicine. Now, I know some of our children are anxious about medication because they hear awful things in the news. But in our video we filmed for kids, real-life ADHD, we filmed 30 children, and we had a segment on medication. And there were a lot of kids that commented on it, and 2 or 3 of them did not take medicine, but most of them did. And they're saying things like, when I didn't take medication, I was really bad. I got into a lot of trouble, and I don't want to do this. So my medicine really helps me. So what I find is that teens are often another teen's best teacher, and we did the video in such a way that it was in 20-minute segments. We know our kids can't pay attention longer than that. So one of the little tricks I suggest is if you know your child's coming home and he's just walked in the door, that you start the video on the section on medication or some section in the video, because invariably if you're in there laughing or they hear the TV on or the video on, they're going to wonder what's going on. And I actually saw that happen. And there's humor in these videos. We also feature an adult physician who has ADHD, who is quite talented and very humorous. But that's one of the reasons why I have developed an array of resources, because I didn't have those for my son. And you don't use necessarily the same words. But again, when you're trying to partner with them, I spent a lot of time trying to educate Alex. Alex, people with ADHD have trouble falling asleep. Or Alex, people with ADHD have trouble getting started. Or they have trouble being organized. And, you're doing two things. Otherwise, if you don't tell them those kinds of things, I asked one of Alex's friends why he, thought that he was not doing well in school. And he said, I must be lazy. Oh, my gosh, that broke my heart. But if we help our children understand what those ADHD struggles are, then they will, number one, know that they're not just being lazy or disrespectful, and you give them a strategy. Okay, let's do this or this, and take a choice. But that's how I would approach it. And that was kind of a rambling answer. Susan,
no, I think that was really helpful. No, that's really helpful. One, people are wondering exactly where your videos are available. You mentioned the videos several times.
My videos, all my books and videos are on my website, and it's chrisdendy.com.
chrisdendy.com.
Yes, and you can actually see clips of the video for our teens with teens. Now, they're all teens except the physician at the end, and it's about a 2-hour video, but don't try to watch it all the way through. In fact, with the Bird's Eye View book, if you have kids who are willing to read, in the very opening part, I say, do not read longer than 20 minutes. It's hazardous to your health. So you have to consider the child's ability to attend. And we also did a video, my husband insisted, a video for fathers, and the father's video clip is on the website also. And what some fathers are too busy to come or don't understand it, or were like my husband, a military dad who thought discipline would fix everything. And my husband so wisely tells them it didn't work, and here's what does work. So I think I've told you all before.
Okay. That's great. Along those same lines, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris.
No, well, you have to stop me. It's okay.
Okay. And you gave some really helpful ideas on how to explain ADHD to your child. What about similarly to teachers? There are a couple of questions here about this. How would you best inform teachers, and in your view, what should teachers really know? What would help teachers work better with our children?
Well, I would start out with something simple like the getting to know the child, the letter will help. And I think that will set the tone of you'll see what's happening. And I have a fact sheet of 10 key points and facts about ADHD, things like the delayed brain maturity, the difficulty getting started, what executive functions are, things that will, that medicine works. And it's typically either a 1-page or 2-page document. And that will help them understand, I think. So That's something I like to use.
And then we have on our website a great one-pager that Chris created, the Iceberg, which is a handout to give out at school, and I can't recommend it highly enough. You'll find it on attitudemag.com. It's the Chris Dendy Iceberg chart, as we call it, and you'll see it under School and Learning. It's a great handout. I think last year we had over 5,000 people downloaded to hand out at school, so it's free.
I would suggest also using it for parents because it helps. I have treatment professionals who frame it and put it in their offices, and parents buy it to show to their parents, to relatives, to other people because it helps them. So you have to read your teacher to make sure that they're ready to see something like the iceberg. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we have our original 11 by 17, I think, color poster that a lot of people frame, and that's available on our website. But Susan and I talked, and even though this is a copyrighted iceberg, Susan and I felt it was important enough, and Wayne, of course, to share with Attitude, and they did a fantastic job, and I'm so glad that people can access it.
And we will post that link. Someone requested for that link. I'll have that for you guys shortly. Interesting comment here from Patricia Chris, who's a special ed teacher, and she's raising a concern that others have raised on the webinar as well. She says, quote, as more and more parents empower their children with the information about ADHD, I'm noticing that kids are now coming in and using it as an excuse. I can't write a 3-paragraph story because I have ADHD. I can't sit during their 10-minute read aloud. I have ADHD. I can't do multiplication because I have ADHD. What's the alternative to this? Is her question. So that's from a teacher.
That's why I really recommend the video, because Dr. Mandelkorn will sit there, and at the very end he talks about, now you may have trouble with this and that, but you cannot use it as an excuse. So none of the leaders in the country researchers will say it's an excuse. It explains some things, and it's a reason, but they can still learn how to do and will. And so you know how it is. The kid it's hard for them. So you kind of do what I call soothing ruffle feathers. John, I know this is hard for you, son, but, you know, you can't really use it as an excuse, but here, let me help you. Or if there's another student who can help him, start getting started, getting started on an essay or whatever project he's working on. But clearly, parents need to give the message, look, it's not an excuse, and we've just got to make the best of this and figure out how to interestingly enough, you have to teach them things that we take for granted that they already know. All right, you know me, I'm going to get going again, so I'll stop and you tell me what you want next.
Okay. Chris, numerous people are looking on your website for the videos and not knowing, not knowing how to find it. Can you tell us more specifically how they find the...
All right, you go to chrisdendy.com and you'll see the clips down at the bottom and to the left, and they can click and watch them. And then you go up to products, and when you go to products, there'll be a page, and this is my best elderly memory, and it will show pictures of all of them and also the videos. And then you'll click on the video you want. It will take you to another page where the PayPal, you will, enter the price that is stated there.
Okay, and then someone else has posted the URL is chrisdendy.com/products. So that may be helpful.
Okay. That will be helpful. But across the top of the page, once they get to Chris Dendy, they can see the products. But regardless, both ways will be helpful.
Okay, and then for Attitude, for the iceberg chart on Attitude Magazine, we want to go to attitudemag.com/download/explaining-ADHD-2 teachers. So we'll also post that URL in just a second. There's some great handouts and one-page sheets there for those of you who want to have some handouts, and also some great sample letters. I think we're a big believer at Attitude, as is Chris, in writing a sample letter for about your child. To Annette is Chris Dendy, Chris ChrisDendy.com/downloads. Okay,
I
great.
have free articles on my website too that are instructive. And also, like I say, I've been very active on Facebook now for a year, constantly posting information or articles. Why are our kids always late? Why do they have trouble falling asleep? So it just depends. They can get great information from your places and from some of my material too.
Okay, great. I think there's a lot of interest in Chris, in your mention of remind.com. And what the listeners are wondering, are there other apps and tools that you recommend for helping ADHD kids at school?
Yes, but I don't have the list in front of me. Let me think. Apps. Well,
listeners, you could also post in the Q&A box any ones that you find helpful that I might be able to share with the other listeners. We do have several webinars on that topic in our archives, just Chris, if you want time more to think about this. And
I can send you something, but for example, Time Timer is very helpful with regard to time issues. And I'm sitting here looking at my clock timer, and my colleague Carly has an app on her phone with Time Timer. And you've got to remember, time is abstract, and Time Timer has a red line that moves as time passes, and that helps our children recognize that. Alex loves his phone because he can put reminders in there. Our kids can take pictures of the homework assignment on the board. There are things like, I I just made up a list that I posted in my training this past weekend. My daughter-in-law loves something called Teachers Pay Teachers, which is allows you, teachers will make up creative strategies to teach concepts, and then another teacher can buy that rather than having to create her own new stuff.
Okay.
So,
helpful. Listeners, we do have a number of articles on apps at school, so look on our site for that. We won't go into that.
Yeah.
Number of people were very interested in your comments about recent developments in the 504, especially that to know that your child is eligible without failing. Is that also the case for IEPs? And can you give any more tips to managing the IEP 504 process and making adjustments to it as the school year goes on?
You know, I'm certainly not an expert on the law, but I've always been told that Americans with disabilities trumps everything. IDEA 504, because it's a civil rights law. Now, I have created a summary of what the latest changes are. Plus, there's a document out from Office of Special Education that's called Know Your Rights, and then it's related specifically to ADHD. And I also have the link to that. Now, I can send that to you for you to post. My summary, you know, because I'm a former lobbyist, I will reference a certain section of the policies that they wrote and then explain what it means or interpret it as I see it. But those are two main issues, and you tell me what would be the best way to, you know, I had all that stuff and all my handouts just this past weekend, so I'm sitting here looking at my desk wistfully hoping that I could put my hands on one.
Well,
in a minute,
you know, it's okay. We also have a very extensive description of the 504 versus the IEP and the description. So, and you're right, Chris, it's a big topic. So,
I think it helps if we pull out the key elements that are specific to our kids, because you know how it is. If you have a real long document, it's hard to find the meat that you're looking for.
Right.
So I'll send these things to you, and then you can decide whether or not to use them, or they can email me, and I'll send them my summary and the link to the Know Your Rights paper.
Okay, great.
And my email is just my name, chris@chrisdendy.com.
Okay. So another question. There are a number of parents who are all on board with partnering with their child, but their child isn't on board with partnering with them. So more than one person has posted that their child is very resistant to any intervention by his or her parents into the school process, does not want their advice, doesn't want strategies. How should a parent deal with, I guess, what might be called an oppositional child?
Well, you know, one of the things I did early on, and obviously you can't always do, but I was chairman of my CHAD group, and we set up a program where teens came in and talked to younger kids. And so what you're doing is educating them about it so that they're not so reluctant. And in our teen video, the three of the young people who are speaking say, you know, you're going to need a little more help for a few years until you can get it on your own, so be willing to accept help from others. And the truth of the matter is, if the child doesn't want the help, you can't force it. Now, if you have life and death issues, like I was very firm, Alex, if you're going to drive, you have to take medication. But the more you educate your child, the more that they'll understand how you're trying to help them. And sometimes it's like maybe mom can't do it, but dad can because of the relationship issues. So if one parent's better at this and more patient, or the kid will accept it, or get the doctor to talk to the child and say, you know, you may need more help, but just helping him understand that, how do I explain that?
Well, it is challenging. I know it's challenging with a resistant child, but I think your advice about having listening to their peers sounds really great. I mean, I think that's, can we turn for a second to middle school?
Yes.
Parents are saying, and I can so empathize with this, that the challenges of having a good relationship with a teacher escalate when your child reaches middle school and suddenly has 6 teachers. And even the idea of, scheduling a meeting 2 or 3 weeks in with a teacher suddenly becomes really complex when you have 6 or 8 teachers. What do you recommend for middle school? Are there any specific suggestions that you would find useful for dealing with the middle school world?
Well, you're so right. When you've got to track down all those other teachers, that's tough. So maybe what you do is you go through the guidance counselor, or you see if the guidance counselor can arrange, she can go behind the scenes and say, please be aware this child is ADHD and is facing these issues. And, what I would do, if algebra was the class where my child was struggling, I'd be sure I had a good relationship with the algebra teacher. And so just also, sometimes you can, if you're active in the PTA, you do a program on ADHD and help them understand. I know one night I had the good fortune to do an intensive training at a local school for 3 months, and I did a parent session for them one night, like a PTA thing. And so anything that you can do, now, I don't mean this unfortunately, but times change. Everybody thinks they know all they need to know about ADHD, but they don't. And so autism is really just consumes most of the air, and understandably so, because it is so complex. But see if you can't get a training session on ADHD.
Okay, that sounds really good advice. A question from a teacher, which I love this teacher. She's so open here. She's here listening, and she wants to know, what do you suggest that educators can do to help their students and families with ADHD have a successful year?
Well, if you identify, be on the lookout for those hidden learning problems I told you about. And, for example, if it's, our children can be in classrooms with a teacher who is rigid and there's conflict. And, yes, they're going to have to get along with some difficult people throughout their lifetime. But if this is happening time after time, switch that child out, because we know that in negative anxiety-producing environment that our brain produces cortisol, and it blocks our ability to learn. And so that would be one thing. Repeat your question again, because I had one other point and it disappeared.
She asked a very general question about what advice you have for educators to help the students and the families that they're teaching with ADHD be successful.
Well, stay in touch with the parents, and, what can we do to help? And if this person you're speaking of is an administrator, the administration from the top down sets the tone of helping or not helping, or being supportive or not. And so hopefully setting that kind of atmosphere. One of the exciting programs we know about is a model program that one of my friends and colleagues set up after school. And basically the kids came every afternoon and they helped them get their homework done. This nurse wrote a grant to do it. They worked on executive function skills, getting started, organizing it, and she set it up so that it was fun. And grades improved, fewer discipline problems. And then after the kids graduated, they came back and spoke to the younger students. And so the students were happier, teachers were happier. So
that's great.
But
involve the kids. So I'm very sorry to say we're out of time. I just want to say two things in addition to thanking Chris so much and referring all of you to her website. And one is that there are a number of questions about the IEP 504 process. And we are going to post some links to some attitude materials that I think you'll find helpful on the page, the webinar replay page for Chris's webinar. You'll find some links there. Just go back to this page where you logged in, and if you look there, we will, in addition to the replay link, in case you want to listen to this again or download Chris's slides, we'll also post some very specific references to IEP and 504 process. And the second is I want to just thank again Esteem Therapeutics. I want to tell you again about Esteem. They are a new company that has an automation of managing your child's ADHD that allows you to log in and guides you through all the insights and resources and instructions you need. And that's at chooseesteem.com. So I think you'll find it interesting to check that out. Chris, thank you again so much. And we're always so grateful to have you.
Make sure everybody gets that Know Your Rights. That's just a 2-page thing.
We will. We'll have that. We'll have the iceberg chart. Yeah.
Great.
And great. Okay, thanks everybody.
It's been fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Have a great school year. Thanks.
Okay.
Talk to you soon. And don't forget to check in every week. We have another wonderful webinar, including one specifically on IEP and 504. So look at our schedule. Thanks all.
All right. Goodbye.